Hello again, everyone. Not to take away from my 20 minutes, I just want to say very quickly that this paper really pulls from the book that I've been working on quite a bit. And before I sort of dive into the paper, I want to say that the work for the book, sort of the research, the method in the book really was just, it was pretty painstaking. I did a lot of web scraping, used a lot of software applications, virtual ethnography, and I was able to do some in-person interviews. So it's been a labor of love, but I want to sort of just give you that as context. So as you listen to these different pieces that I offer to you, you know that there's a lot of data that's driving it. So today I'm going to, in Seagal words, give you some little bite-sized pieces of my research with the hopes that you will be hungry for more and that you will go buy the book uh, when it's published. So I start off with a quote that is drawn from Ellison's Invisible Man. So these are not my words. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus shows, it is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves are figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. This opening quote captures an intimate moment of reflexivity. Here, the main character uses his life as an interpretive lens to reflect on his own invisibility. In this introspective moment, he acknowledges his visibility. He is a concrete representation of Cartesian dualism, occupying both mind and body. Despite this acknowledgement, he proclaims, I am an invisible man. His invisibility is directly linked to the refusal of others to see or recognize him. And for those of you who are familiar with Ellison's book, we know that it is solely due to the protagonist's race that people refuse to see any and everything else but him. So I know that you are thinking at this point, how is Ellison's conception of invisibility related to notions of absence and presence of Africana religiosities in the digital landscape? I'm glad you asked. Even if you didn't ask, I'm glad you asked. For well over 2 decades, practitioners of African descent, particularly those living in the US, have had an online presence. Presently, these same communities, along with other new ones, practice their traditions by way of emergent technologies. Despite this technological presence, when one considers scholarship that has been published on religious practice in digital media, Africana religious practitioners' engagement of technology is absent. My argument is simply this. Much like the protagonist's invisibility in Ellison's work, scholars have refused, either consciously or unconsciously, to see the religious cyber activities of African Americans. My PTTP sponsor, I can't believe I got that out because that's such a tongue twister, sponsored research counters such invisibility. Specifically, my book, Africana Religion in the Digital Age, sheds light on the sophisticated usage of digital interactive media by African American practitioners to construct complex modes of identity. Through the use of digital media, they make their presence known. What follows are just a few examples of the technological presence of Africana religiosities that I've had the pleasure of researching during the grant period. And so I began with mysticism, Black podcasting, and sacred identities. This was such a fun chapter to write. So I'm just pulling some pieces from it. Well, I sort of wrote something else, but I'm pulling from that chapter. African American mysticism has been traditionally defined as an experiential negotiation of human divine interactions, marked by liminality, ineffability, and concrete outcomes like that of identity construction. This conceptualization of African American mysticism relies heavily on textually based interpretations of mystical experiences. But how can the geography of African American mysticism be expanded by considering sonically mediated mystical encounters like those occurring in the world of podcasting? After spending countless hours in the digital universe of Black podcasting, I advanced the following theory. Black podcasting is a form of African American mysticism. I'm going to get into so much trouble in my subfield by doing this, but the data speaks to this. Black podcasts are mystical spaces where notions of sacredness are negotiated in ways that reaffirm traditional understandings of the sacred, but not at the expense of using the same medium to complicate the term. Black podcasts capture tensional interplays between immateriality and materiality, interiority and exteriority, and subjectivity and objectivity. These negotiations represent contrasting modes of human experience that lies at the heart of African American mysticism. Black podcasting is a sonic form of African American mysticism because it provides opportunities for the construction of complex identities in relationship to various notions of sacredness. These identities at times are directly informed by one's interaction with sacred others while generating or listening to podcast content. For example, we see this demonstrated in the podcast Black Girl in With over 2 million listeners to date, Black women are invited to unapologetically expand their consciousness to transform themselves using African diasporic religious, meditative, and healing practices. They are invited to pursue and apprehend an authentic representation of themselves. While at other times, sonically produced identities are not necessarily informed by human divine interactions, but embody self-representations that are sacred in orientation. For instance, the creators of the mighty metahumans employ metahumanism as a device to not only highlight the show's content, which is all things DC, Marvel, and anime related. If you've never heard of this show, you have to check it out. It's called The Mighty Metahumans. However, according to Carlton and Dennis, they are indeed metahumans. On the one hand, they are human, specifically occupying Black bodies. But on the other hand, they embody representations of what they call the meta. Namely, they are more than human. They are sacred. Here, sacredness is not attached to a transcendent, immaterial entity. Instead, it is a human mode of being, an ever-pervasive heightened self-awareness. These are just two examples of how Black podcasters act as I'm calling them in this chapter, digital mystics. Their shows are informed by Blackness, liminality, embodiment, and sacredness. And these are qualities that we find have been characterizing elements for African American mysticism. More important though, Black podcasters' employment of digital sound technology to manifest new modes of beingness complicates how African American mysticism has been traditionally defined by scholars. My second nugget will be drawn from Black witches and their usage of social media to construct multidimensional identities. Now, what's interesting is I think my very first talk, in the conference was about witches of color, but this was during a time when I was just starting to get into the communities. So you can imagine, I've interviewed, I've spent a lot of time in these spaces, and so I have something a little bit more nuanced than that I presented to you that a few years ago. What does a quick Google search for witches of color reveal? Result pages highlight articles, podcasts, popular cultural representations in the form of comics, web series, music, social gatherings, primarily through apps like Meetup, and related websites like Black Witch University and Black Femme Witches Brew, all related to witches of African descent. Also included among these hits are a number of social media accounts that are associated with individual witches of color in communities composed of members who often refer to themselves as Black witches. For instance, witches of color can be found on community blog websites like Tumblr. Here, communities like Black Spiritualism, Witches of Color, Black Witches, Black Witch Space, and African American Witch feature blogs and curated images to discuss and to capture the dynamic world of witchcraft as practiced by those of African descent. While a small number of witches of color are active on sites like Reddit, they don't like Reddit. Their activities are most prominent on Twitter, Instagram, and most recently, TikToks. No matter the platform though, the prevalent usage of social media by witches of color cannot be simply regarded as yet another example of mysticor. Their presence on these platforms is not just a trendy attraction to occult traditions and practices. Instead, their activities point to a relationship with magical traditions from the African diaspora that holds a deeper significance and possesses an underlying subversive power. Their toolkit is not just limited to magic, though. Black witches have another dismantling instrument, the internet. At times, witches of color use their digital platforms to resist societal oppression, to ensure self and collective survival, and to reclaim authentic Black witchcraft, and to express empowerment. At other times, they employ social media as a device to assert a sense of agency and an authority over their unique craft. Moreover, Black witches use digital spaces as outlets to express multidimensional forms of identity that are defined by both collectivity and individuality. Collectively, witches of color see themselves as women of African descent, possessing both power and the means to alter and control manifested realities in their lives. But this consensus does not stifle the individual witch's desire to carve out a personalized path of witchcraft, a path that defines who they are as a witch of African descent. In this way, social media, in the words of one Black witch, which I interviewed, is just another thing, quote, is just another thing that we manipulate. It is another thing in our toolkit to help us live our best lives. The last little nugget that I'd like to give you is a chapter that I'm currently finishing up. And a lot of it was based upon interviewing spiritualist mediums in the ways in which they employ technology in their mediumship. And so I just want to give you a little tidbit from that chapter that is tentatively titled Mediums, Spirits, Zoom, oh my. If you know anything about the Wizard of Oz, it's like lion, tigers, and bears, oh my. Much like Black podcasting and the digital practices of Black witches, African American spiritualist mediums' usage of technology has received scarce attention. Early Black mediums like Pascal Beverly Randolph, Hattie Wilson, and William Cooper Nell were biotechnological conduits that disembodied spirits used to communicate with those still living in the earthly realm. Their ability to receive transmitted vibrational signals from an immaterial dimension became known as the spiritual telegraph, which was a direct reference to Morse's telegraph. Appropriation of this kind by spiritualists in general, and Black spiritualists in particular, continued during subsequent years of technological development. Typewriters, telephones, radios, and even televisions were deemed as viable outlets for spirit communication. In other words, according to one Black spiritualist, quote, spirits are malleable and can use different technological media to get their message across simply because they are energy, end quote. Therefore, as you can imagine, the term to digital technology has not posed any challenges to these same spiritual entities. Video conferencing platforms like Zoom represent the latest ways in which African American spiritualists are engaging spirits. Interviews with mediums who use Zoom as a tool of mediumship reinforces that technology still lies at the heart of spiritualism. Moreover, an intersectional self-representation of the medium that is informed by race, gender, and class concretizes in the multiple interactions, client medium, human spirit, client spirit, that occur via Zoom. Taken together, I'm just rounding it up here, taken together, these three examples represent various ways that African American practitioners make their presence known across various digital platforms. My PTTP research has sought to capture various snapshots of this activity. It is truly a survey type of book, and it's designed on purpose in that way because no one has really done this in the field. The overarching goal is to make visible the online activities of these practitioners, which I maintain have been subjected to varying degrees of invisibility in both digital religion studies and African American religious studies. In the end, my work seeks to make visible those that have been deemed invisible. Thank you.